Hello and welcome to Oregon Environmental Council's 2026 Legislative Session Debrief. I'm Jana Gastelum, OEC's Executive Director. It is wonderful to see so many people joining today. Today, we want to give you an insider's view on the 2026 short legislative session. And although it was only 35 days long, there is still a lot to talk about. For those of you who are members and action takers with OEC, thank you for your support and especially your engagement. You are what motivates us and keeps us moving forward. This year, you helped create the largest climate lobby day since COVID. Thank you for showing up. For those of you new to OEC, welcome. We are a statewide environmental nonprofit with membership throughout Oregon. We specialize in impactful and equitable public policy because we know that changing systems upstream creates long-lasting benefits to our health and the planet's well-being. We value relationship building and are a trusted source for quality educational materials and webinars. We empower people through trainings and resource sharing that helps more voices be heard in decision-making processes. We also recently joined a lawsuit to hold the Trump administration accountable for unfair treatment of renewable energy, which will result in higher energy costs and lost job opportunities. And that's why we're pushing back in this important moment in time. We do all of this in service of creating resilient communities, fair, sustainable, and affordable economies, and healthy people and landscapes. Before we dive in, I wanted to say a few words about legislative work. Since our founding in 1968, OEC has worked upstream to prevent harm, to protect cherished places, and to create a more even playing field for healthy practices. OEC works on public policy because getting the rules right is critical for lasting change. Our work at the state level is also more urgent than ever with the dismantling of federal agencies and protections. We know that Oregon values are aligned with protecting clean air, clean water, and healthy communities in every corner of our state, and Oregon needs to continue to be a beacon of hope at this moment in time. OEC also not only helps pass meaningful policy, but we also stick with it through implementation and watchdogging progress. It takes time and expertise to show up over the many years it takes to make meaningful change. Now, each legislative session has its own fingerprint. Because of the federal overlay, this one was quite unique and challenging. Major reductions in funding and the need to create a balanced budget dominated attention for this session. You'll hear more about that later. But I want to take a moment here to also talk about one of the reasons that OEC is successful doing this work, and that's because of our truly phenomenal staff. Our program directors are well-versed in their issues. They work long hours tracking, analyzing, and negotiating bill language. They travel to the Capitol to be there in person. They prepare testimony and materials. They meet with legislators and other stakeholders. They also do a tremendous amount of work to set others up for success and to meet with decision makers. We also work with our legislative partners, their staff, the Environmental Caucus, state agencies, and myriad coalition partners. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that our team did this session. There's just a little snapshot of the level of effort we took this year. To join me in discussing this session, I am so delighted and honored to be able to invite Representative Mark Gamba and Thomas Baker to join us today. I'll introduce each one, and then Thomas will lead a conversation. As a reminder to our audience, you can submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar screen. And given that we only have an hour today, we may not be able to get to everyone's questions, but we'll try our best. So it is my true delight to get to introduce Representative Gamba. Before he entered politics, he was an editorial photographer where he was sent around the world to capture images of exciting adventures and beautiful locations. Decades ago, he was seeing undeniable signs of increasing drought, bleaching of coral reefs, melting glaciers, significant weather disturbances, and other indicators of climate change across the globe. And in spite of very clear warnings from the scientific community, he saw that governments and businesses weren't doing enough to address the impending threat. So climate change was the core reason that Mark first ran for Milwaukee City Council, and it remains his top motivator to this day. During his 8 years as mayor of that city, he championed causes ranging from urban tree canopy protections to advancing racial justice in the city bureaucracy to building out bike and pedestrian infrastructure that benefits livability today. Mark is one of the few renters currently serving in the Oregon State Legislature, and he is one of modest means. These perspectives inform his policy positions, and he strives to keep poor and working class families centered in his lawmaking at all times. And I will add a personal note that Representative Gamba is a true environmental champion. We are grateful for his tireless work, which is literally from dawn till dusk, many days, especially during a short legislative session. And we're incredibly lucky to have him serving in the state legislature. Thomas Baker is also joining us today. He previously served as OEC's legislative director and has over 15 years of government affairs work, including serving as Senator Burdick's chief of staff in the Oregon State Capitol and being VP of Government Affairs for a Fortune 35 company. He studied political science and economics at both the University of Washington and Portland State University, and Thomas now runs Cascadia Public Affairs and represented OEC in our coalition this past legislative session and was invaluable to navigating the twists and turns of transportation policy. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Representative Gamba and Thomas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jana. Well, Rep. Gamba, thank you for joining us today. I thought maybe I could start with a high-level overview of the short session and then pass over to you to fill in the gaps or add some additional commentary. But for those watching, this was an even year, 2026, which meant it was a short session, and they're just 35 days long. So fewer bills, tighter timelines, but still it seems like just as much work to do. And those 35 days sometimes feel 3 or 4 times longer than that. It feels like a short session. Often we go into short sessions with trying to finish the work that didn't get done in the long session, making targeted fixes or investments, responding to any urgent issues that happen between both sessions, and setting the table for future legislative work. After a 2025 session that I think left many big challenges unresolved, particularly around transportation funding, climate investment, and basic services, there was a lot of pressure coming in 2026 to deliver and to try to set the table for 2027. Short sessions are always compressed, but this one was especially challenging because lawmakers were trying to address several major issues, again with a very limited window. Disconnecting from the federal tax code to try to bring additional revenue into Oregon. Several big budget issues, most notably the transportation funding crisis, which we could spend a whole half hour on. A $300 million shortfall to ODOT, and we'll get into that a little bit later on in our conversation. And then other emergency policy issues such as legislation around land use, tax incentives and enterprise zones, Measure 114 implementation, campaign finance, federal disconnect. You were busy, Rep. Gamba. And this was a tough session for so many stakeholders, and to be fair to you guys, given all the chaos at the federal level, it seemed like you were very much impacted and hamstrung. Your efforts it's harder than it has been before. What did I miss? Anything you want to add there? Comment on?
I think thanks for doing that, and thanks, Jana, for the really sweet introduction. I think one really important piece to that was the disconnect part. So our state budget was about $1 billion short due to the fact that our income taxes, which is predominantly what Oregon runs on, since we don't have a sales tax and we've kind of broken our property tax, our income tax is tied to the federal government. It's tied to their system, it's tied to their rules. So when Donald Trump and company change those rules in order to benefit the billionaires, that literally takes money out of our budget. So to the tune this year of about $1 billion. Next year it will be worse. We ran a disconnect bill. We negotiated the best deal that we could get within the caucus. And we reduced those losses by about a little over $300 million. We could have, it should have been more like 6 or 7. And that was a frustration, and it caused us to have to make some cuts in places that I would rather not have been making cuts. And more importantly, next year when the cuts hit from HR 1 on Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, education, we are going to be stuck with less income to try and backfill to the degree that we can all of those cuts. So That's a really important piece because it's going to ride with us for a long time, and we have further work to do on that.
Yeah, we came into the session already knowing we had Medicaid, a huge Medicaid hole, a transportation hole, K through 12, and to leave that much money on the table during that time seems really problematic. Well, let's stick with this theme of budget issues. Uh, you know, Oregon's in a spot with all the federal cuts, and just given the way our revenue system is set up, that we're gonna have to start, I think, thinking more creatively about how we bring revenue in. We can only raise taxes so much. We can only tax so many things. Yes, there's room to do that, but from a client perspective, we tried to bring in some creative ideas with the Forge Act, which would have opened up a green bank and been able to do lending. And we've seen in other states a good ROI on that, where money comes back into the state. There's job increases, more taxes, and we also came forward with Make Polluters Pay, which would have had big fossil fuel companies have to pay for wildfire damage and all the other impacts we've seen in climate change. We know New York and Vermont are going through this right now. We knew one of those ideas might have been too creative for a short session. Hopefully, we'll stay at the table for a long session. Another one we got close to the finish line on, but there was a technical issue with LFO. But it was frustrating because it's like we need to be bold here and we need to think creatively. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and what you think like our next steps for the state to take on some revenue challenges we're facing.
Yeah, the Make Polluters Pay is particularly frustrating. We brought that in the last session, and it died in committee. This year it made it out of the Senate committee, but died in Ways and Means. Leadership is not acting boldly. They are acting from a standpoint of fear. And they know that both New York and Vermont are being sued, and they don't want to put us in that position, which on one level is understandable, but on another level, the fires that we saw a few years back that were so catastrophic, and some of the damages from rainstorms that we've seen this last year, taking out roads, those are the tip of the iceberg. Those are the kinds of problems we're going to have going forward. This summer has a high likelihood of being a really like the worst fire year ever due to the lack of snowfall. And we're stuck paying for the costs to that. I don't know if anybody's following this, but one of our IOUs, one of our electric utilities, is being sued for billions and billions of dollars due to losses that were caused by one of the fires, which were to some degree caused by that utility. But it was just a matter of time that fire was going to happen anyway, because the conditions were what they were. And that's the kind of money we're talking about. And if we don't pass something like Make Polluters Pay, the state's going to be on the hook for trying to solve problems that are huge. And this
Yeah.
is exactly what that bill is designed to do.
But it seems like, I heard a lot of lawmakers say, let's wait and see how things play out in New York and Vermont, but that could be years. And whatever that district court says is not going to have an impact on us. And so we're in the ninth district, which has typically been favorable. So it seems like we should do this and know that there's going to be litigation, and we should be doing this on other fronts. And if we were to just win, one of these cases, and who knows, how many we could win, that would pay for all these small, we're talking very incremental investments for a huge ROI. And so hopefully we can get, more lawmakers to understand that going into next session. Speaking of budget issues, it's not just about, how much we have, and continue on this idea of revenue reform. Oregon has a very wonky revenue system. Property taxes are capped. We have this very unique thing, the kicker, that it really makes our budget challenging. I know you've had some creative ideas on how to reform the kicker, but first, could you maybe level set with our audience as basic as possible, because it's very complicated, what the kicker is and what your plans were to try to help bring in more money from it?
Sure. So what the kicker was sold to people as years ago, back in the 70s, I think, when we had lots of timber money in the state, it was sold to people as returning some tax dollars in years when we didn't need that money, when we brought in too much revenue, which is really kind of hard to imagine at this point. But that's not the way the bill was written. The way the bill was written was that the state's economist is meant to guess what our income is going to be 2 years from now, and then anything over the amount they guess goes back to the taxpayers. So it has nothing to do with whether we need it or not. As this year is a prime example, right? We had to cut really important programs just to balance the budget, and we at the same time were kicking $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. Now, keep in mind that the vast majority of that money goes back to the richest Oregonians. I mean, we all get a little bit in our income tax the next year in our return, but the vast majority goes back to very wealthy people who do not need the money. And so it is just another cut. You know, we don't have sales tax, which we'll get into a little bit more when we start talking about transportation. And it is really hard to run a state on volatile income tax that can change dramatically from year to year when you've attached to it this crazy concept of the economist having to guess what that income would be. We kicked $5.6 billion in the biennium after COVID. $5.6 billion. Imagine what we could have done for schools, for all kinds of things with that kind of money. So it's the bill that I brought would not have gotten rid of the kicker. In order to do that, that's a vote of the people. It was put in the Constitution, like so many of the very bad ideas Oregon has had over the years. We make sure and enshrine it in the Constitution. So to completely get rid of it, we would have to have a vote of the people, and that's going to be hard. So my bill created a process that just directed the economists to do their prognostication differently, and it created more of a range. And so the result of that bill would have been that we would have kicked less often and for less money. It still would have kicked. I think the calculations we saw were that in the last 10 biennia, it still would have kicked like 3 or 4 times. It kicked all of those years in the current process, and we needed money in most of those years. So it would have made things better, but again, lack of intestinal fortitude on the part of the leadership, because it will be challenged in court. There's no question. But
And
I think,
again, we need to take some shots.
yeah.
We just need to make one.
What's
Could we?
the Gretzky quote?
Oh yeah, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could we just also just to bring this back to why environmentalists should care about revenue? Maybe it's obvious. Maybe it's the obvious question I shouldn't ask, but what are some things out there that we're missing out on because we don't have revenue, like electrification, EVs? Why should we be up in arms about this and maybe like be connecting with other progressive groups about coming to the legislature and say we need to fix our revenue situation?
Yeah. I mean, it's wide and deep. So if you look at our budgets, the natural resources portion of the state's budget is a tiny, you probably know it better than I do, it was something like 4% of our overall budget. So that's money we don't spend protecting wildlife. That's money we don't spend building out our electrical infrastructure so that we can electrify more of things, get away from natural gas. It's money we don't spend helping renters have opportunities to have electric cars, like by putting EV chargers in apartment complexes. There's so many things we could be doing right now to reduce our greenhouse gases and to really, again, attain leadership in the environmental world. We are not any longer a leader. We're 47th in the country for the deployment of new clean energy. 47th.
Yeah.
Texas is doing significantly better than we are.
I spent some time there and shocked at how much better Texas is doing than we are. Another place that we're falling behind on is transportation.
Yeah.
especially being a leader on multimodal transportation, safe routes to school, biking. We were really close, and let's go all the way back to 2025 to level set with the folks watching.
Oh, you went on mute.
Can everybody hear me and see me? I just got a note that my internet was unstable.
Yeah,
Everybody froze. Okay,
yeah,
great.
you're back.
And Rep. Gab, I really want to thank you for your work on that because, we were working on this package that we felt was very moderate. We had Republicans come out with just some draconian ideas to try to move the conversation all the way to the zone of ridiculous, like we're going to run out ODOT desks to pay for things. And we wouldn't get anything in return for it except, maybe some basic maintenance while our bridges and roads fall apart. You came out with a lot of great ideas, ideas you knew that probably could be pretty radically perceived by some voters and move the conversation back over here so we could get back to that work on a really good package. And I feel like that was a turning point. So I just want to take a second to thank you for your efforts there because I think you had to take some arrows for that and really trying to do what other legislators should have been doing is pushing the conversation back the other way. But we came really close. We had historic funding for safety and multimodal transportation. We even at the very end had some stuff around electrification, EVs, even opponents that are usually on the opposite side of us for transportation had some great things in it. And it fell apart, but maybe I think we all could say it was like one vote short, probably. What we ended up not getting a transportation package. ODOT has a $300 million shortfall. We tried to pass a Band-Aid reconcile package to cover that. It got referred to the voters to vote on it. More than likely, I think it's probably not going to do well at the ballot box. It puts us all in a tough situation. We had to cut critical programs to keep ODOT jobs and just keep the basics going. What's the, no pun intended, the road look like now, right in front of us? Like, what tools do we have? Road user charge? Can we get a transportation package in 27? Like, what does that future look like for us now?
That is an excellent question. I was trying to help set up that conversation this session by to try and pass a bill that would have at least put us in the realm of having an adult conversation about what it costs to keep our system functioning and how many miles we drive and therefore what we should each be paying for each mile that we drive. And I couldn't even get that bill through Ways and Means, passed out of committee, but it died in Ways and Means. Had like an $800,000 fiscal on it. But this is the problem, right? We have done these transportation packages over the years as more of an emotional exercise than any kind of a logical exercise. And the way they have negotiated deals before is by giving away projects. Oh, you get a widening on the interstate, and you get a bike path, and you get a bridge. In trade for votes. And that is no way to run a system. So what I was trying to do was set up that adult conversation so that we could at least say, okay, this is our system. This is what it costs. If you're choosing not to increase taxes to the point where we can maintain that system, what things are you choosing to get rid of? Which bridges shall we close? Which roads shall we turn back to gravel, right? But we don't have that conversation. There's this imaginary world that the Republicans live in where there's plenty of money and we're just wasteful and we don't use it well. The reality is, per capita than any state in the West.
Right.
Any state.
And I think something that most people don't realize, unless you've come from another state or spent some time out there, is we don't have any tolling, no active tolling right now, and no sales tax to work with, which without those tools, and you're just relying on a gas tax, which is steadily declining because cars became more fuel efficient, you cannot operate a transportation for a state, and everything's built around that. Economic development, safety, health, everything starts with transportation. And so, it's really challenging because I don't think a lot of voters spend a lot of mental time on how important it is, what tools we lack. And I don't think a lot of lawmakers spend a lot of time thinking about how important this is to all of our future priorities and what tools we lack. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to give folks a sense, Utah and Idaho both spend about twice per capita what we spend on our transportation systems. And about half of that money comes from sales tax.
Yeah.
That's how powerful and how big of a deal it is. So when people whine about, well, our gas tax is higher than other people's gas tax, yeah, because we've only got one way that we can fund our transportation system.
Yeah.
So until we rejigger our entire revenue system, it's going to continue to be that way. And the hope is that we can set up the road user charge so that EVs and hybrids and things are starting to pay into the system a little bit more. But that's going to take 3 or 4 years to really bring significant income in because it's going to cost a lot to set up that system.
Yeah.
So we have to actually pass a real revenue package in the next session. Otherwise, we are going to be in a world of hurt. We have bridges right now at the current trajectory that we will not touch for 900 years. There is no bridge ever built in America that was designed to last 900 years.
Yeah, and they're not. Some of them are not in the best of shape already.
Yeah.
Well, enough on financial woes. Let's go to something else I know that is near and dear to your heart. Let's talk a little bit about renewable energy and the grid. I'm wondering if you could. You've done a lot of work over the last couple of years on these things. I wonder if you could let our watchers know what kind of work you're doing and what you see are some future goals for us to get excited about.
Yeah. So, a few passed one which put us on a trajectory to have certain levels of renewable energy at certain time points in the future. We're not going to hit any of those targets right now because our transmission system, which was, they stopped adding anything to it 80s, I think, so 40 years ago. And 75% of it is controlled by Bonneville, owned and controlled. And so the reality is there are gigawatts of wind and solar projects waiting to build in eastern and central Oregon, but they can't do it because they can't get capacity on the transmission system because it is full. So I brought 3 bills in the last session. We passed 2 of them. Those 2 will help a little bit. But what we really needed to pass was the transmission authority, and we'll be bringing that back in 27. The governor's office will lean in on that because now everyone is finally starting to recognize that this is a major problem, not just for hitting our clean energy targets, just to have electricity on a basis. I mean, we are looking at rolling blackouts sometime in the next 10 years if we don't start building out some new transmission.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for your work on that. Um, Maybe it's a good time to highlight some positive stuff, some wins this session, before we lose everyone. This, yeah. Let's go positive for a minute.
Sure. One of the most exciting bills to me, and it's such a small thing, but it isn't in the realm that it plays in, was the 1.25% for wildlife bill, which basically added a bed tax, a little 1.25% to the bed tax that tourists pay when they get a hotel room, and that money goes to wildlife. So it's broken into like 3 or 4 different parts. But it was money we've never had before. Right now, the way we fund anything for fish and wildlife is through hunting and fishing licenses, and therefore the only species that they concentrate on are the ones that people hunt and fish. So all of the other species, rare species that we have in this state, they had no capacity for years, for decades, to work on that, and now they will for the first time. This bill has been 10 years in the works.
Yeah.
And we finally passed it out, which that was the best day of the session, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a great win. We did get a few wins. I'm glad you got to highlight that. A couple more questions. We're going to open up to Q&A. One, kind of a more, some people might think it's a frivolous question, But the last few years, the Capitol's been closed off for construction. That came out of COVID. I think between COVID and the Capitol being closed, it was really easy for lawmakers to not get a chance to know each other, not only across the aisle, but probably in their own caucus. I think that creates some polarization. It creates some tense dynamics. Is any of that improving with the Capitol opening? Are relationships forming? Are we starting to see folks work together a little better? And does that like give us some hope for the future?
Well, that's hard to, you know, there's new dynamics
Yes.
in that realm that we didn't have before the Capitol closed. But I would say that we have a room in the Capitol. It's a different room now than it was before, where legislators can go get a meal and sit and talk with each other, and it makes a big difference. I mean, I
Not
got to
being hangry?
not being hangry, not having to worry about, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm down in the Capitol by 7, and then usually not home until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And somewhere in there, I have to arrange for meals and do dishes and all those kinds of things. With that room open again, I don't have to do that. So it saves me a little bit of time in my day. And I get to sit and chat with all kinds of legislators, people from the Senate, with Republicans, and it does make a difference. A lot of times, those conversations in that room are the beginning, or at least moving the needle a little bit on ideas and people's interest in working together. So it's valuable to have that there.
Yeah, it's really hard to demonize someone when you get to know them as a person and a friend. And I feel like when I was working in the legislature, another thing we did that I'd love to see come back is we used to like committees would go out to have dinner together, staff and legislators, and do games and stuff like that. And that was a great way to bring people together. We'd forget about all the stuff we argued about earlier in the day and figure out how to move forward on things. Last question, then we'll open up to Q&A. What do you see are the top priorities going into 2027, especially around the stuff that OEC is working on? Because you serve on all of our committees. You serve on the Ag and Water and Everything Committee, Energy and Environment, Transportation. We work in all those sectors. From each of those committees, what do you think the top priorities and the things that we're going to be focused on over the next year
Yeah,
and a
I'm,
half?
I'm not actually on ag anymore. They when the space opened up on climate and energy, they pulled me off of ag to put me on climate and energy.
But you
Um,
did a ton of work there, so yeah.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
For a session, I was in that committee, and it's near and dear to my heart. I'm actually running a big land use process right now. Our land use system is 50 years old. It was brilliant when we passed it, but it didn't recognize things like, climate change. So it needs some updating, and in order to speed up the siting of transmission and wind and solar, we need to do some work on our land use system. So that's one of the big bills that I'm going to be bringing in the next session. We'll bring back the transmission authority, like I said. I think we've got to pass a big transportation package. There's no question. That will be one of the main things that's talked about. There's some interest on the Republican side, a little bit on a cap and invest system. I think for nefarious reasons, but we'll see if they actually stick to their guns on that, and we could join the market with California and Washington and Quebec. It would make a difference. Give us money to work in those areas. I think another thing that's going to take all the oxygen out of the building again is all these cuts from the federal level that we're going to have to try and do something about, right? Try and keep people continuing to get health care, keep people fed, all of that stuff.
Can
Uh,
in the middle, just jump in real quick on that.
yeah.
Do you get a sense from any Republicans at the state level that they're worried about that? That maybe some of these cuts are too far. That these are important things, or is it feeling like this is going to be very partisan even at the state level, even though their constituents are impacted by these cuts?
I have not had any of them say something like that to me. I can only imagine that, in by themselves in the dark, they do worry about that because, frankly, their constituents are more dependent by population on those services than in sort of the bluer districts. So they should be very worried if they're not. But no, they haven't publicly or even in private meetings said anything like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, transportation definitely the big thing. Cap and invest. There's going to be a lot to work on. There's going to be a lot that we need OEC members engagement on and help. Jana, with that said, do you want to help give us a wrap up and steer us into the Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Representative Gamba and Thomas, for such a fun, engaging, and just sort of eyes wide open. I think having a clear-eyed look, diagnosing the problems as they exist today. Um, I really appreciate Representative Gamba too, how you're trying to set the state up for success going forward, that we don't just keep digging holes deeper, but that we actually solve problems holistically as we continue to move forward.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, and we need that kind of vision, I think, and leadership. And I think Oregon has been on the map in the past as really being a leader on so many issues, and there's a hunger for us to get there again. Um, well, we know that it takes a village to move good public policy forward. We also know that public voices are really important, and taking that input is really key. And so what we want to do now is continue to encourage civic engagement from our members, from listeners on this webinar, even when it's hard and frustrating, and maybe especially when it's hard and frustrating. But we have to keep showing up and keep engaging. And to that end, we do want to open up some Q&A. So I'm going to go to the Q&A function and just bring up some questions that have come up. And I do want to pick up the thread a little bit on some of the things that have already come up. Our audience is so awesome and so informed. And so let's talk about transmission in a little bit more detail. It has been slower to add clean energy to the grid here in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. There was a question that came in noting that Washington State just had some grid improvement policy passed, and wondering if there is sort of tailwinds or good lessons learned from other states that we can build on. And how do we think maybe as a region about this resource? And then I wonder if Representative Gamma, you can talk a little bit more about what a regional transmission authority could do and what the benefits are.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. Okay, so I'll start with the 30,000 foot level. A regional transmission organization is exactly what we should be in. There should be a west-wide transmission organization so that there's somebody who's thinking about the transmission system region-wide and planning for it and then working out deals to build it in a thoughtful way. We do not have that in the West. We are the wild, wild West. We The Pacific Northwest quasi had that with Bonneville for years, but they've a little bit abdicated their responsibility there. So the Transmission Authority bill that Washington passed, is interesting, is basically my bill. We had done a year and a half, 2 years almost of work on that, and then met with their legislature along with folks from Idaho and Montana. And Washington picked up that bill and ran with it, and they actually got it passed this year. So that's exciting, and I think that will help Oregon, I hope, get it over the finish line because we really, really need it. If I feel like there was another part that I haven't touched on to that question.
Yeah, I think just, if there's any other kind of model policy from other states. And then I think there's the transmission, there's kind of the grid, the hard infrastructure itself, there's the governance. Um, and then I wonder if you have any thoughts or insights on renewable energy development itself, because there's siting and permitting pieces as well.
Right. So part of the reason that Texas built 10 times more wind and solar than Oregon and Washington combined over the last decade is that it is so hard to do here. We, for years, were putting in place rules and regulations designed to slow bad things down But unfortunately, the way those rules and regulations were written, they also slow good things down. So we're literally the hardest state to develop solar projects in, according to the solar developers that I work with. It is the slowest and most difficult to do here. So that's part of what my work group is working on right now is coming up with solutions to that. Our goal, I mean, we don't want to have no rules like Texas, but we certainly want it to be a lot easier to do here because we know that the vast majority of Oregonians want us to build out our clean energy system. So that is a key piece to the legislative session this next year.
We had a question that just came in about Oregon has this storied land use law, set of land use laws. But it seems like there are now kind of annual uh, attacks or efforts to kind of change urban growth boundaries. We know farming is important to the state. There's new demand for land from data centers, and that's a whole nother slew of questions that have come in. So I'll take that separately. But the question is there a way that we can balance our system to give some reasonable economic development, housing development, but also ensure that our farmland isn't used for irresponsible development? And should we expect annual discussions, or is there a way to more holistically set up a system?
Well, we're about to find out. That's the work that we're trying to do. When I announced that I was going to be working on land use around clean energy and transmission, people came out of the woodwork to say, "Oh, and please add housing and please add industrial land." We'll see how open this work group is to doing all of those things. But you're right. It's, again, we did something really smart. If you go to places like Atlanta, the sprawl is insane. You can end up driving for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and still be in the city um, to get to your job from home. So the smart thing we did was to control our sprawl and to protect our farm and forest land. And and it worked great for 50 years. But we do need to update it. It is a 50-year-old concept. It needs a refresh. And I would argue that we need to make it easier for small cities to do that process. That's why there's been so many little one-off bills that allow some small city somewhere to do it, because it's such an onerous process that a small city with a small staff really can't do it. So that's one piece. I think another piece, when they sort of decided what were farmlands, they kind of painted that with a very broad brush, right? All of this is farmland. Well, we know that in the middle of that, there's, a rocky ridge that you couldn't possibly grow a sagebrush on, let alone wheat or something else. And I think one of the things we could do is go back through and do mapping that is much more accurate and much more granular, and then make it easier to develop either housing or renewable energy on pieces of land that aren't valuable either as farm or forest land or wildlife habitat. I mean, I don't want to diminish that either. That's another piece that our land use system has helped protect. But I think there's opportunities to do this better, and it can't be a 6-year process to figure it out each time. It needs to be something that can move a lot quicker.
Yeah, my colleague and I just were out in Eastern Oregon recently and noted that there are places where you get that kind of co-benefit of renewables and farmland together. So for irrigated land, irrigation pivots create a circle, and there are corners that water never gets to. And so we met a farmer who put wind turbines in those corners that are never cultivated, and that was seemed like a real win-win. I think many people are also interested in seeing how agrivoltaics move forward in the future, where you get both, again, productive agriculture and renewables. And so farmers have maybe another revenue stream that help them out. These have been really volatile times for the farming community as well, with weather disruption and market disruptions. And so I think trying to find those win-wins throughout the state are always worth looking at.
And tariffs, don't forget the tariffs.
And don't forget the tariffs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and agrivoltaics I think is brilliant. I was just on a call the other day with a bunch of other state legislators from around the country, and there's a state in the Midwest, I want to say it's Wisconsin, but I can't remember now for sure, that just passed a really, really good agrivoltaics bill, and we're supposed to be getting a copy of that that will probably put into this mix of concepts for how we move things forward. As it turns out, in Germany, where they're using agrivoltaics the most, they're actually improving the yield from the farms, reducing water and other inputs, while still getting the income from the solar, and we get the energy from the solar, right? So it's this triple win concept that I think Oregon could really lean into and utilize really well.
Yeah. Well, we know for OEC's legacy, our land use laws are really important. We are proud of OEC or Oregon again being an innovator in this space and really appreciate thinking about how we preserve and protect kind of those core landscapes while also meeting today's needs. So we've gotten many, many questions about data centers. Um, we know that there is a statewide conversation happening convened by Governor Kotek, and we also know that public policy is important in this space. I'm going to try and kind of mush together a couple of the questions that have come in. And I would say the tenor of the questions range from a lot of extreme concern. Do we have the land base? What about water? What about energy prices? Also, too, are there opportunities to think about setting the right rules and conditions so that these large load customers are part of solving bigger problems? Is there a connection, for example, into better grid management with some large load customers who are productive and active participants in that? I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what you think the legislative conversation might be, or just kind of your take on this big emerging and present issue in the state.
Yeah, it's a very big deal. So that the data centers in essence are why we're expecting a 30% load growth over the next 10 years. So it will absolutely affect our electrical system. It does. The data centers done poorly use a lot of water. There are ways that they can cool those systems that are liquid cooled instead of air cooled, which uses a heck of a lot less water. Um, so there are things they could be doing, and we're looking at what those are to potentially pull together a bill to make basically the best practices be the minimum standard for Oregon. Another thing to consider, um, we don't have sales tax. I keep going back to this. Most states do have three kinds of taxes: sales, income, and property. Um, and they waive their sales tax for these data centers. Well, we don't even have one to waive. So we waive instead property taxes. And this year, I think the number was about $500 million that we didn't receive from the data centers in property tax. So my strong recommendation, if anyone would listen, is that we stop doing that. They get the benefit of us not having a sales tax. That should be good enough. That we require the quality of infrastructure that could be there, that we require them being part of a distributed power system, like a virtual power plant. They could be huge players in that realm. And one little good piece of news is that they had agreed when I was creating my transmission authority concept to be the entities that fund that for the first, I can't remember, it was either 6 or 8 years, to the tune of about $2 million a year, because they recognize that they have a great need for electricity and they want it to be clean energy. I honestly do believe that they want to be running those things on clean energy. So they want us to be successful in that realm, and they are willing to help to some degree. But, there's still capitalism. So The Power Act should help to some degree keep all of us from having to pay for the majority of the increases that are going to be necessary to build out the system, specific when it's specifically for the data centers. But that is something to keep our eyes on and make sure that that's working the way it should. But I think there's a lot we could be doing over the next year or two to rein them in a little bit, to cause them to be a bigger benefit to the state, and to make them better neighbors.
Could I ask a follow-up question, Janet, to that real quick? Something I wanted to bring up earlier that we missed. Speaking of load growth, we didn't get a chance to talk about virtual power plants. I know you've done a lot of work on that. You and Senator Neuron had a bill this last session. Maybe we could just spend a short time on how that would help with load growth challenges in the future.
Yeah, virtual power plants or distributed power is a brilliant way to sort of shave the peak. So if you think about our electrical system, we build the electrical system and require that it function at the worst times, like the hottest days, right? Or the coldest days when we need the most energy. And that's what the system is designed around. We could have less of a system if we could shave those peaks off. And that's what a virtual power plant can do. So from a consumer standpoint, it might be that you have an EV with a smart charger at home, or maybe you have a solar array and some batteries on your wall, or you have a smart thermostat or something like that. And an aggregator can work with you to make a deal that when we have this peak load, we're going to turn down your thermostat, or we're going to pull a little energy from your car, or pull a little energy from your wall batteries, to meet that peak load. That is incredibly powerful. And if you listen to the deep thinkers on sort of the energy markets out there, they believe that virtual power plants are going to be one of the really huge markets going forward in that realm. We ran that bill last year. It died in Ways and Means. It didn't even get out of committee this year when Senator Mislin carried it. So we've got some work to do with the PUC, and to try and solve for the issues that they think it has. But virtual power plants are something we could do pretty quickly if we allowed third-party aggregators in the state to protect us from the rolling blackouts that I was talking about.
Well, we are coming just to close, so maybe I will ask one final question. And Representative Gamba, we just want to appreciate again your leadership around transportation issues. We know that 30% of Oregonians can't drive because of age, ability, income, or who really feel like active transportation is better for their health and well-being. Tailpipe pollution continues to be a major contributed to air quality challenges in the state and health challenges in the state. And we also know goods need to get to market, and people need to get to work, play, and recreation. I wonder if you could just quickly lay out kind of like a vision for a wellness, people-based kind of transportation package, as we continue on this conversation into next session.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot we could be doing. So it was work I started in Milwaukee, trying to build out our active transportation system so it's safe for kids, anybody from age 8 to age 80, to be able to walk or bike anywhere in the city. That was our goal. And when you make it that way, you reduce tailpipe emissions and you give people an opportunity to get places in a way that improves their health, gives them some time outside, improves their mental health, all these things. It is a really important piece, and it was one of the sad things that we ended up having to steal from in order to keep ODOT functioning this year. Was we took away from Safe Routes to School. So that's one piece, and then transit, as you mentioned, is the other big piece. For a hot minute, we were one of the leaders in transit in the country, and we are falling behind on that as well, and we're underfunding our transit systems pretty dramatically at this point. We've seen cuts across the board at almost every transit agency. So the bill last year had a significant increase in state funds for transit. So that needs to happen again. We need to get our transit systems up and functioning. And people think that that doesn't happen in rural areas, but a lot of rural folks are dependent on transit as well. And then get money up for investing in our bike and pedestrian infrastructure, both to allow people to do it safely and to reduce deaths and reduce congestion. The best way to reduce congestion is to get more people out of their cars. It's not to build more highway lane miles. So, and then the third piece is really the transition to electrification. While it's better if you ride an e-bike than if you drive an EV, driving that EV is certainly still better than driving a gasoline-powered car. But in order for people to do that, they need to be able to charge their car relatively conveniently. So that means either at home or at work. And I think 40% of the population are renters. So we need to start building EV charging in uh, apartment complexes so that renters have that option, and they know that they'll have that option. I had a bill, was it last session? I think it was last session, that would have started to do that with new construction. Again, couldn't get it passed. But those are the pieces that we could bring to the system so that we do start to reduce the greenhouse gases, we do start to reduce congestion by creating all these other opportunities for people to use. And then when you do have to drive, to be able to drive an EV. Those are the key pieces, and including electrification of things like school buses and trucks. I happen to live very close to Titan Trucking, which is, I think, the greenest trucking company in America. Um, they've converted most of their semis to EVs, and that's the kind of, we need to continue that transition to reduce it in the biggest way possible. I think another little piece that's hanging out there right now is renewable diesel is a really good solution kind of for the transition between uh, diesel and fully electric, because some of the long haul trucking is going to be very hard to transition to electric. But renewable diesel is a very low carbon way to provide that energy. And also it's a very small tweak to take that product and use it in airplanes, which is another big greenhouse gas producer.
Well, thank you. I know we're hitting the top of the hour. So, Representative Gamba, thank you so much. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you for your leadership for Oregon. It means so much. Thomas, thank you for being such a great collaborator and communicator. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you for your thoughtful engagement. OEC, our work is 100% funded by the generosity of our members and our supporters, and we could not continue this work without support. So I hope you'll continue to consider supporting OEC as we move forward and navigate through these big issues in the state as we continue to build partnership. And we really hope that people stay engaged. We know that there is a lot of issues at hand. People are navigating a lot through their own personal lives, but showing up and engaging in civic conversations is so critical to our success. Our leaders need your support and engagement as well. Thank you again for everyone who joined us. Thank you to my team who helped make this webinar possible, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation in the days ahead. Take care, everyone.
Take care.